Welcome to our new unit on classification of life. And to introduce this unit, we need to go over some of the characteristics of all living things. All living things, no matter how different from each other they may be, share a set of common characteristics. There are 7 things that you're looking for. All living things, first, are made up of units called cells. Cells don't always look the same. Cells definitely don't perform the same functions. Cells are not always made of the same parts inside, but every organism has cells. Some organisms are unicellular, which means they're comprised of only one cell, while other organisms are multicellular. The next characteristic of living things is that all living things must be able to reproduce. And again, similar to cells, not all reproduction happens through the same processes. Some reproduction is simple binary, asexual binary fission, like our bacteria here, while other reproduction requires different cells from male and female of the species in order to pass on different genetic material. Next, all living things are based on a universal genetic code called DNA, and this code is what gets passed from parents to offspring during reproduction. All living things must be able to grow and develop. These are 2 separate terms that are similar but not exactly the same. To grow means the organism gets bigger and bigger because the cells that comprise the organism divide into more cells. To develop simply means that the cells that are in the organism specialize to do specific jobs. Another characteristic of all living things is that they must be able to obtain and use energy. So, in some form or another, all living things must be able to basically get food and then break that food down into energy. Next, living things must be able to respond to their environment, such as something as easy as turning the lights on, causing the pupils in your eyes to dilate or get smaller, or a plant responds to light by growing towards the brightest area. If this pot would be turned around, the stems of the plants would eventually grow the other direction in order to be facing where they find most light. Another component of being able to respond to the environment is something called homeostasis. Homeostasis is a balance between cells and the environment that those cells are in. For example, in an organism like a human, we have responses to maintain our internal body temperature. If you get too hot, you sweat. If you get too cold, you shiver. This is a response that helps keep that internal temperature the same the whole time. Another type of response would be to pain, and if you find yourself in a situation unexpectedly where your cells could be damaged, then you have reflexes that hopefully pull your hand away from something hot, such as that, which helps maintain homeostasis in the way that cells aren't going to get damaged when they don't need to be. The final characteristic of all living things is that things must be able to adapt or change over time. And when we talk about this, we're not talking about single individual organisms. We're talking about whole populations or species of organisms being able to change over many, many years. Another component that we need to review is the difference between 3 terms: living, non-living, and dead. So if we take a look at these objects here, we have an infant chimpanzee, we have the moon, we have a chicken egg, we have a frog's eye, a rock, and a skull. Think about whether these things would be considered living or non-living, and for the purpose of this part of the assignment, just use living or non-living, and we'll talk about dead in a little bit. So the things that were living were the chimpanzee, the frog eye, and the chicken egg. Non-living things included the rock, the moon. The question becomes, where does the skull belong? In this case, the skull belongs in living. But in reality, there is a third category called dead, which is where we would really put the skull. Living things have functioning cells and show all the characteristics of life. There are two ways for something to be non-living. Either it's something that does not show all the characteristics of living things and it was never alive to begin with and does not have cells, such as a chair or a pen or a desk, or it was living but has been processed through some sort of chemical alteration which makes those cells unable to function and essentially destroys them to the point where you can't see the cells anymore, such as paper or leather or juice, apple juice. These things came from once living things, but the process that they went through has turned them into non-living things. The final category is dead things. In order for something to be considered dead, it has to have been alive at one point, but now it no longer has functioning cells. In dead organisms, you should still be able to see the cells if you were to look for them. So let's do another similar activity, living, non-living, or dead. A tree. A tree would go in the living category. It's able to do all the functions necessary to all living things, such as it's made up of cells, which means it's organized. It can respond to its environment, such as sunlight. It uses the sun's energy to make food and then breaks that food down for energy. It's able to grow, and it's able to make seeds that can be part of reproduction. Now, if we take that tree and someone were to cut it down and have, let's say, some wood for fire, this would be considered dead. While the wood still has cells, those are not able to function. So it's still organized. If you cut a slice of the piece of wood and put it under the microscope, you would still see its cells, but those cells are no longer functioning. It can no longer grow or respond to its environment. It no longer uses energy. And it can no longer make seeds that would reproduce into more trees. If we took that one step further and looked at taking wood and turning it into paper, this is now something that's non-living. Although as a tree it was once living, it's now not able to do any of the functions necessary to living things, and it's gone through a process. It was made of cells, but the cells were broken down when the wood was chopped up to make the paper. It can't grow, it can't use energy to make food, and it cannot reproduce. So paper, as being one of the steps along this, kind of looking at the same example, is the non-living part. One last thing to consider: when something has the potential for life, that means it could have all the characteristics of a living thing if it were found under the right conditions. These types of objects or organisms are classified as living. These could be things such as seeds, nuts, eggs, yeast, and so on. So they would fall in the living category. So take a look at these particular items and determine whether they are living, non-living, or dead. You have a dog. You have a seed. You have a leather wallet. You have a chicken bone. You have a metal desk, some lemonade, and fire. Once we have these categories established, we can start talking about how they fit into larger ecosystems. An ecosystem has two parts. First are the biotic factors. These are all the living parts of the ecosystem, such as the plants and the animals and the microorganisms, like bacteria. And then they have the abiotic factors, which include all the non-living parts of the ecosystem, such as things found in the environment: water, wind, light, temperature. Within that ecosystem, and related to the characteristic of providing energy or gaining and using energy, there are several ways to categorize living things, or the biotic factors. A biotic factor could be a producer. Producers provide energy for other organisms in the ecosystem. They get their energy from non-living resources such as the sun. In fact, I think it's only the sun. And they can also be named autotrophs because they make your own food. Auto, in this case, means self. The equation you see here is the reaction for photosynthesis. Take a moment and practice your balancing equation skills and balance this one by putting coefficients where the blue boxes are. One thing to note, in this chemical reaction, it does not occur if it's not in the presence of light. And when you're writing a chemical reaction that has a requirement like that, you put that requirement right over the yields sign. The next type of organism found in the ecosystem are consumers. So producers are the things making their own food, both for themselves and for other organisms to eat. The consumers are the ones that are eating the producers. These organisms get their energy by eating other living things, or if they are a decomposer, they may be eating dead things that used to be alive. Consumers are also known as heterotrophs because they feed off of different things. The food chain is a model that shows a sequence of feeding relationships. It follows the connection between one producer or one type of producer and then a single chain of consumers within the ecosystem, such as grama grass, which is the producer, gets eaten by the desert cottontail, which gets eaten by the Harris hawk. So you see that the arrows point toward where the energy is going, not pointing toward what is eating what. Not all consumers are alike. Some consumers are herbivores, they only eat plants. Some consumers are carnivores, which only eat other animals, and some consumers are omnivores, which eat both plants and animals. And the final category here is the decomposers. The decomposers are incredibly important to our ecosystem. These are the things such as bacteria and fungus that break down organic matter into simpler compounds, and they are feeding off things that have already died. Another extremely important chemical reaction in this whole ecosystem process is the opposite of photosynthesis, which is respiration. Respiration takes glucose with oxygen and breaks it down into carbon dioxide, water, and energy. So, as always, if there are any questions, please let me know.